Sup guys, Christos here, and oh my god, do we have a big week coming up in the stock market. We have Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Twitter, Google, Amazon, and many other companies all reporting their earnings over the next coming days. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the 3 companies reporting this week that I'm going to be watching extremely closely, because I think that their earnings is not only going to have a massive impact on their own stock price, but it could also be a massive driving factor for the way that this market is going to be going in the next coming months. So if you're into this content like stocks, shares, investing, earnings calls, and all of that good stuff, then make sure that you are subscribed down below, and let's not waste any more time, let's jump straight into it. Alright, so kicking things off on Monday, we have got Facebook, and I'm going to be watching this one extremely closely, not only because this is quite a large holding in my own personal portfolio, but also Facebook over the last couple of weeks haven't had exactly the smoothest ride. And basically, out of all the different bad points that have gone on about this company recently, the main one that has kind of gone on that most people are talking about is the whole whistleblower incident, where basically a data scientist or a former data scientist for the company called Francis Hagen basically released thousands of papers worth of research, which essentially showed that the company was well aware of the problems that it had within its apps, and basically Facebook didn't do anything about it, and this has caused really bad press for the company. I'm not going to dive too deep into this kind of whole incident in this video, but just a couple of things that I'm going to be looking forward to or looking for in these earnings is, number one, has this recent spell of bad news around the company actually affected the usage of its apps? Now, personally, I think that we could see a decrease in the usage of Facebook, as in the Facebook social media platform itself. However, I think the other businesses that Facebook actually owns, like, of course, we have WhatsApp, we've got Instagram, they've got Oculus, they've got a few other smaller ones as well. I don't think these are going to be really affected that much. And basically what Facebook will be doing in their earnings calls is likely releasing the numbers on what they call their DAP, which stands for their daily active people. But this is actually spread across their entire family of apps. So obviously Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. Oh, another thing as well is that Facebook and Instagram have actually seen some kind of big outages over the past couple of months. I'm also really interested to see how that has had an effect as well. I think it was their largest outage that they've ever had that happened, I want to say, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then another thing is that there was a hashtag trending on Twitter, at least, of delete Facebook, simply because of all this whistleblower kind of incident. And we all know when a social media trend kind of gets the ball rolling, it normally does have an adverse effect on a company like this. But it's going to be really interesting to see how their usage has affected or has been affected over the past couple of months with all of this bad news. Now, the second thing that I'm actually looking forward to is whether they are actually going to change their name. Now, there has been some reports in some media outlets that Facebook are actually looking to change their name, and this is actually a change as an investor that I would actually quite welcome, because simply we saw it actually a few years back with Google and Alphabet, where basically, because Google owns so many different sub companies like YouTube, I can't think of any other in the top of my head, but basically what they did was they changed their stock name to a holding company called Alphabet, and then had all the different companies like Google and YouTube sitting underneath it. And I think Facebook could really benefit from this, because of course Instagram is a massive business, WhatsApp is actually a massive business, believe it or not, and then of course Facebook is a mammoth business as well. And I just believe that these could all sit within a new name which could actually sum all of these 3 up. And apparently they're either going to be announcing it at their earnings call, or they could be announcing it at their Facebook Connect event. I think it's called Facebook Connect, and I believe that is on the 28th of October. Either way, I would really welcome a name change as well, and because of the bad news as well, I think this could really help the stock kind of get over their hurdle. So that's the second thing I'm going to be looking for in this earnings call. And the third thing is, of course, the revenue growth. Now, what analysts are predicting is revenue growth of 29.5 billion, which is up from the 21.5 billion in this quarter 1 year ago. And I actually fully expect them to beat this. I do not think that anything that has happened recently is going to factor into this earnings call. I think Facebook normally beat their earnings quite comfortably. They definitely beat their last earnings, and we actually saw a really positive move from the stock, at least for the first couple of days on the back of that. But yeah, like I said, I do not think negativity is going to come into factor this earnings. Maybe it will in the long term, but we'll have to see. But just talking about this earnings call, I'm really looking forward to seeing how much they beat by their revenue growth. I think if they were to miss it, I think that would be really bad news for the stock, and I think the stock could react quite harshly to that news. But I'm fully expecting Facebook just to go ahead and beat their revenue growth. So that's the first company, that's Facebook. Now, the next company that I'm going to be looking into is also reporting their earnings on Monday the 25th. So you're likely going to be watching this video on that day. So if you are watching it, it's probably going to be in a couple of hours for you, or maybe it's just gone. And that is Logitech. Now, I'm not actually currently invested into Logitech. I come very close to investing into these guys around 2 or 3 months ago. It was a toss-up between Logitech and Corsair, and I chose to invest into Corsair. Now, the reason why I'm going to be following Logitech's earnings really closely is because they are pretty much a direct competitor of Corsair stock. They're both computer peripheral companies, and of course, if you have been following this channel and you are invested into Corsair, you will already know about the supply chain issues that Corsair have been facing, which has evidently kind of affected their revenue growth over the past few quarters. Now, this is going to be really interesting following Logitech's earnings, because basically, if Logitech are going to come out and report really underwhelming earnings and really underwhelming revenue growth, and the main thing that they do is say that kind of the supply chain issues is going to be a big factor in this, I think that's really going to give us a good sign on where Corsair is going to be heading as well. So this is going to be a really interesting kind of earnings call to take a look at. Another thing that I'm actually going to be focusing on with the Logitech earnings, more so over the Corsair earnings in a couple of weeks' time, is that because Logitech are really big on the basic going to work peripherals. So obviously Corsair are very much suited towards gamers at the moment, at least. Logitech do focus on those businesses. So when I was working for a company, I always use Logitech equipment. And one big thing that has happened, of course, over the last couple of years, which has been what I think is probably a really kind of big blessing in disguise for Logitech stock, is the whole working from home thing, where people have had to, or businesses have had to buy more equipment for those to cater for those working from home. And of course, over the last couple of months, and of course I hope to see this continue, more and more people are returning to the workplace, where basically they probably already have all of the equipment all purchased. One thing that I'm going to be paying attention to, maybe not just in this earnings calls, but just for some earnings calls coming up in the future, is the whole kind of going back into the office play going to have a big effect on Logitech's top line growth. So that's going to be a really interesting one, but not really too much else I'm going to be looking for in this stock. It'd just be really interesting just to see how they perform, because of course Corsair is one of my biggest conviction stocks that I have right now, and yeah, it's probably the closest competitor that it has at the moment. So that is the second company that I'm going to be looking at. That is Logitech. Now obviously, as you can see from this chart here, we've got some massive companies kind of reporting over Tuesday and Wednesday. Just to announce a couple, obviously we've got Google and Alphabet kind of reporting their earnings after the close on Tuesday. You've got Microsoft, you've got AMD, Visa, Twitter. Now obviously, if you were following the Snapchat earnings, you know they had some really disappointing earnings calls. So I may tune in for the Twitter earnings just to see how they compare to Snapchat. I'll probably listen to the Google one as well, just to see how things are going there, because I think they're such a big company that they do drive like the entire tech market sometimes. So I'll be paying attention to that. Just taking a look at Wednesday, just before the open, you've got Coca-Cola and McDonald's. Now I'm a Coca-Cola holder. It's not really a company that I pay too much attention to, just because it's just such a solid company that isn't going anywhere. I don't really see too many big swings in the stock price, but I may find some time just to listen to their earnings calls, or what I'll probably do is kind of just look at the recap of it and just see what's going on there. But realistically, the big one for me is going to be Apple on Thursday after the close. Now, This one, I think, is not only big for me, not only big for other shareholders, but I think it's big for the entire market in general. Because at the end of the day, this is a company that if it wasn't to report its revenue growth or its earnings as well as expected, this normally does have a massive effect on the entire market, simply because of, number one, it's the largest company in the S&P 500, but also the share that it has over the S&P 500. You also have things like my ETFs that I own. Apple has a large allocation in that ETF as well. So this one is going to be a big one for me, probably the biggest out of all three of them. Maybe Facebook might be as well. But basically the common theme that I'm looking for in this one is, of course, once again, supply chain issues. Just the same with Corsair, really. They're going to be struggling with chip shortages. And one thing that I will be paying attention to is, obviously, unlike Corsair, Apple has a lot of a bigger buying power, and it'd be really interesting just to see how they have kind of coped over this kind of global shortage that is currently out there. Now, one thing I am going to say about Apple, which I have noticed, I don't know if any of you guys have as well, is that this isn't the first time that we've seen it with Apple, where basically news reports have come out and they've said Apple are facing supply chain issues on their phones. I've seen this for a couple years now, where basically I believe it was first off with the iPhone 11. It was saying that they weren't able to produce enough iPhones to meet the demand, or so to say. Now, I don't know if that was because of chip shortages or anything like that. I think it was something to do with China production rates and things like that. But I definitely know about the iPhone 12. We had exactly the same news article where basically they were coming out saying they can't produce enough iPhones this year. And every year, I believe the iPhone of that current year went on to breaking their record sales figures or breaking the previous record of the previous iPhone for the following year. And I think that all came around in the earnings call of early next year. So just something for you guys to think about if you are following Apple as a stock. Will it happen this year? Obviously, this time it's a global shortage, so we haven't really seen that too much before, but it's just something that's really interested me and something that I'm going to be following very closely, and I'm going to be watching their earnings call or listening to their earnings call and seeing if I can pick anything up about that. But in terms of their stock price, I can only really see a big swing downwards if they really do miss, but I think everyone is expecting Apple to beat their earnings. They normally do beat their earnings, but of course it's all about how much are they going to beat their earnings. I think with this one, I think if they only just kind of beat them, I think we're going to see a very flat, if not maybe negative stock price reaction after the earnings calls. However, if they absolutely smash their earnings, then this is going to be very positive, not only for Apple investors, but I think for the stock market in general, because I think it might put a few people's kind of fears and doubts about the market in general aside for the meantime. But that is basically the earnings this week. These are the ones that I'm kind of paying attention to. Of course, there are so many earnings that are currently going to be coming out over this week, next week, and I think there's a few more big ones coming the week after. But yeah, obviously, as you can see, you've got Spotify here. That's quite a good one to listen to. Shopify, Amazon. Didn't even mention Amazon. That's a massive one. A couple on Friday as well. Royal Caribbean, that's obviously a stock that's been quite battered recently because of the pandemic, and it'll be an interesting one to see how this one is kind of coming out of the pandemic and see if we're seeing any more positive numbers from this company. But they are the stocks that are reporting this week. Let me know in the comments section down below about the companies you're going to be paying close attention to this week. But having said all that, I will catch you guys in the next one. Take care, and I'll see you soon.